Frank Miller always felt more at home among his plants than people. The small garden behind his apartment held more wonders to him than any human city. So when NASA selected him as part of Earth's first diplomatic team to meet the Ziraxians, he was both honored and terrified. "Just be yourself," said Director Wilson the day before launch. They specifically requested a plant expert. "Your knowledge of adaptive botany made you perfect." Frank nodded, but doubt filled his mind. The Ziraxians had contacted Earth just 6 months ago. Their massive ships appeared in orbit without warning, causing worldwide panic until they broadcasted their peaceful intentions. They were travelers, explorers, and traders, an empire spanning 12 star systems. And humans were the primitive new species they found interesting. The journey to the Ziraxian mothership took 8 hours in Earth's newest space shuttle. Frank spent most of it staring out the window at the enormous alien vessel. Its surface looked like polished metal with strange, organic patterns flowing across it. "Preparing for docking," the pilot announced. "All diplomatic personnel, please prepare for arrival." Frank checked his uniform one last time. That morning, he had walked through his garden to calm his nerves. Now he brushed at his sleeve, not noticing the tiny yellow dandelion seed that clung to the fabric. The docking bay was massive. At least 30 human ships could fit inside it. A group of tall, blue-skinned aliens waited for them. Their bodies were thin but strong-looking, with 4 arms and large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Welcome to the Imperial Vessel Horizon Dawn *," said the tallest Ziraxian. "I am High Commander Vox Terra." The human ambassador stepped forward and performed the greeting they had practiced. The Ziraxians seemed pleased, their skin patterns glowing slightly brighter. Later, during the tour of the ship, Frank was amazed by the Ziraxian botanical laboratory. Plants unlike anything on Earth grew in special containers. Some moved on their own, while others glowed or changed colors as they watched. "These are simple specimens," explained a Ziraxian scientist named Krelar. "Our botanical engineering is thousands of years beyond yours. Earth plants have their own special qualities," Frank said, feeling a need to defend his beloved flora. "They survive in ways you might find surprising." Krelar's upper arms made a gesture that Frank understood was their version of dismissal. "Your planet's plants are quaint. They lack the sophistication of properly engineered botanical life." Frank wanted to explain how dandelions could grow through concrete, how they adapted to almost any environment, how their seeds could travel miles on the wind and still grow. But he kept quiet. This wasn't the time for arguments. That evening, the humans were given quarters on the Ziraxian ship. The diplomatic meetings would last 2 weeks. As Frank unpacked his small bag, he didn't notice the dandelion seed fall from his sleeve onto the soft, nutrient-rich soil of a decorative plant in his room. The next morning, the seed had already sprouted in the rich alien soil. Its growth rate was twice what it would have been on Earth. Frank spotted it while dressing but had to rush to a meeting. He made a mental note to remove it later. A tiny Earth plant couldn't possibly matter here among these advanced beings. By the time the diplomatic mission ended 2 weeks later, Frank had forgotten all about the small yellow plant growing in his temporary quarters. The humans returned to Earth, celebrating the new trade agreements and cultural exchange programs they had established with the mighty Ziraxian Empire. 6 months later, when the first reports arrived from Zirax Prime about strange yellow flowers appearing across their southern continent, no one on Earth connected it to their diplomatic mission. No one except Frank, who felt a cold shiver run down his spine when he saw the images. The dandelions had found a new home, and they were thriving. Lisa Carter wiped sweat from her forehead as she studied the readings on her tablet. 6 months at the Ziraxian Science Outpost had taught her to adjust to the planet's warmer climate and slightly higher gravity. As Earth's leading botanist assigned to the Cultural Exchange Program, she found everything about Zirax Prime fascinating. "Dr. Carter, you should see this," called Keith, her research assistant. He stood near the edge of the outpost's boundary, pointing at something yellow in the purple-hued fields beyond. Lisa walked over, squinting in the bright sunlight of Zirax Prime's two suns. Her eyes widened when she saw what Keith was pointing at. That's impossible. A patch of dandelions, at least 50 of them, waved in the alien breeze. Earth dandelions. Here, Keith asked. How could they survive in this atmosphere? Lisa knelt to examine the plants. They looked like dandelions, but were already showing signs of adaptation. The stems were thicker, the leaves slightly bluer, and the yellow flowers more vivid than those on Earth. We need to report this immediately, Lisa said, carefully collecting samples. At the Ziraxian Botanical Center, High botanist Krelar examined the dandelion specimen with 4 eyes that blinked in sequence. His blue skin displayed patterns of amusement. This primitive plant poses no concern, he said, looking down at Lisa from his 8-foot height. Our ecosystems are far too advanced to be threatened by Earth flora. With respect, these plants are already adapting to your world, Lisa argued. Dandelions are among the most resilient plants on Earth. They can grow almost anywhere. Krelar's upper arms made a dismissive gesture. I will place a specimen in our botanical garden as a curiosity. Nothing more is needed. 2 weeks later, Lisa received reports of yellow flowers appearing in fields 50 miles from the first sighting. A week after that, farmers 300 miles away reported the same yellow blooms among their crops. The spread rate is impossible, Keith said as they mapped the sightings on their computer. It would take years for normal dandelions to cover this much ground. Lisa studied the latest samples. The dandelions were changing. Their roots grew deeper than any she had seen before, and the seeds had developed tiny hook-like structures that could attach to almost anything. They're adapting to the higher radiation levels, she explained, and the nitrogen-rich soil is supercharging their growth. We need to convince the Ziraxians to take this seriously. But the aliens remained unconcerned. At a meeting of the Ziraxian Science Council, Lisa's warnings were met with what humans had come to recognize as alien laughter. Your Earth plant is spreading, yes, but it is harmless, said Council Leader Mevdox. Our world has survived far more aggressive invasive species. This will be no different. That evening, Lisa sent an urgent message to Frank Miller on Earth. The dandelions are everywhere. The Ziraxians won't listen. Something about this planet is making them mutate faster than should be possible. 3 months later, the southern continent of Zirax Prime displayed yellow patches visible from orbit. The Ziraxian Agricultural Ministry finally acknowledged the issue but classified it as a minor nuisance requiring standard containment procedures. Lisa stood at the edge of what had once been a field of Ziraxian grain, but was now a sea of yellow flowers stretching to the horizon. She pulled up a dandelion to examine its roots and gasped. The root system was nearly 3 feet long, triple what it should be, and had strange nodules growing along its length. When she cut into one of the nodules, she found something that made her blood run cold. The plant tissue inside was dense with specialized cells that Earth dandelions had never possessed. The dandelions weren't just surviving on Zirax Prime. They were evolving. And they were doing it faster than any plant in Earth's history. 1 year after the first dandelion was spotted, the situation on Zirax Prime had changed dramatically. Lisa Carter stood at the window of the research station, watching workers in protective suits trying to clear a field of the yellow flowers. It was useless. For every plant they removed, 10 more seemed to appear overnight. They've spread to the eastern continent, Keith said, showing Lisa the latest satellite images on his tablet. Yellow patches now covered nearly 20% of the planet's surface. Have you seen the new samples? Lisa asked. The root systems are unlike anything I've ever seen. In the lab, they examined the latest specimens. Normal dandelion roots went down about 6 to 8 inches. These new ones extended over 6 feet into the soil, with dozens of offshoots that spread like fingers through the ground. The farmers can't remove them, Keith said. They're choking out the native crops. 3 farming regions have already declared harvest failures. Lisa had been sending reports to both Earth and the Ziraxian Science Council for months. Earth was concerned but could do little from so far away. The Xeraxians had finally stopped laughing, but they still blamed poor agricultural management rather than recognizing the true threat. That afternoon, Lisa attended an emergency meeting at the Xeraxian Agricultural Ministry. The room was filled with blue-skinned officials, their skin patterns showing stress and concern. The yellow plague has reduced crop yields by 30%, announced Minister Jarvin. We must identify better herbicides immediately. Lisa stood up. These are not just weeds. The dandelions are changing. Their biology is adapting to your planet in ways we've never seen before. What do you suggest, Earth botanist? Asked one official with obvious doubt in his voice. We need to understand how they're adapting so quickly. Something in your soil or atmosphere is accelerating their evolution. I need more research resources. The officials muttered among themselves. Finally, Minister Jarvin spoke. You will have what you need, but results must come quickly. That night, as Lisa worked late in the lab, she received an urgent call from a farming community 100 miles away. You must come immediately, said the Xeraxian farmer, his voice shaking. The yellow plants. They're doing something new. Lisa and Keith arrived at the farm the next morning. The Xeraxian farmer, next core, led them to a fenced area where several small farm animals were kept. Watch, he said, tossing some feed onto a patch of ground covered with dandelions. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the dandelions nearest the food began to bend toward it. As they watched in horror, tiny root tendrils emerged from the soil and began pulling the food down into the ground. They started doing this 3 days ago, Next Core said. Yesterday, one of my animals was found dead, partially pulled into the soil. The plants were feeding on it. Lisa carefully collected several specimens, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just adaptation. The dandelions weren't just spreading. They were hunting. Back at the lab, analysis confirmed her worst fears. The dandelions had developed specialized cells that could sense protein and move toward it. Their root systems had evolved to produce weak acids that could break down organic matter. They're becoming carnivorous, Lisa told Keith as they stared at the test results. And not just that, they're developing a rudimentary form of communication through their root networks. Lisa sent an emergency transmission to Earth. Request immediate consultation with Dr. Frank Miller. Dandelion invasion critical. Plants exhibiting impossible evolutionary leaps. No longer just invasive, becoming predatory. Xeraxians still underestimating threat despite crop failures. We have months, not years, before ecological collapse possible. As she sent the message, Lisa looked out at the fields beyond the research station. The sea of yellow seemed to wave at her, almost mockingly, under Xerax Prime's twin suns. Frank Miller stepped off the transport ship onto Xeraxian soil, his heart heavy with guilt. The message from Lisa had finally forced the Xeraxian government to request Earth's help, and Frank was chosen to lead the response team. The situation has worsened since my last report, Lisa said as she greeted him. Her face was tired, with dark circles under her eyes. The dandelions have reached the capital city. As their vehicle moved through the streets of Xerthal, the Xeraxian capital, Frank saw the evidence himself. Yellow flowers pushed through cracks in the walkways. Buildings showed damage at their foundations where roots had penetrated the materials. Their construction materials contain organic compounds, Lisa explained. The dandelions can sense and break them down now. At the emergency command center, High Commander Vox Terran no longer looked like the proud leader Frank remembered. His skin patterns showed deep distress. Dr. Miller, he said, your Earth plant has damaged 3 power stations and disrupted our water systems. The southern continent is lost to us. We evacuated the last city there yesterday. Frank winced at the words your Earth plant, but he couldn't deny the truth. This crisis began with him. Show me everything you've learned, he said to Lisa. The research lab was filled with specimens of the mutated dandelions. What Frank saw shocked him. The plants had changed in ways that should have taken millions of years of evolution. They've developed these nodule structures along the roots. Lisa showed him. They function like a primitive nervous system. The plants can sense proteins, heat, even movement. Have they attacked people? Frank asked quietly. Lisa nodded. 3 cases so far, all in rural areas where the root systems are most extensive. The victims were found, partially consumed. That afternoon, the Earth scientists met with the Xeraxian Science Council. The aliens' attitude had completely changed. Gone was the arrogance and dismissal. Now they listened with urgent attention. The plants have infiltrated 63% of our agricultural regions, reported Science Minister Tekvar. They grow back within days when removed. Our strongest herbicides only slow them temporarily. And now this, said another official, displaying images of a Xeraxian building collapsing as its foundation was undermined by roots. As the meeting continued, an emergency alert sounded. The room's display screen showed a real-time feed from a residential area. Dandelions were pushing up through the floors of homes, growing at visible speed. That's impossible, whispered one of Frank's team members. Nothing grows that fast. Evacuation orders are being issued for that sector, announced Vox Terra. We must move 3,000 citizens immediately. Later, as Frank examined soil samples from the affected area, he noticed something strange. These mineral readings, what are these particles? Lisa looked at the data. That's Xeraxium. It's unique to this planet. Their technology is based on it. Frank stared at the readings, an idea forming. What if the Xeraxium is acting as a catalyst, accelerating the plant's growth and evolution? That night, as Frank worked in the lab with Lisa and Keith, an urgent call came from the Defense Ministry. The border of the southern containment zone has been breached. The root network is expanding at triple the previous rate. Frank looked at the latest samples under a microscope. The cells were dividing faster than any plant cells he had ever seen. And the root structures were becoming more complex, almost like neural networks. They're not just plants anymore, he said quietly. They're becoming something else entirely. Something we've never seen before on Earth or anywhere else. Outside the lab window in the dim light of evening, the fields of yellow seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing, as if waiting. The herbicide isn't working, shouted a Xeraxian worker through his protective mask. Frank watched from behind a safety barrier as jets of blue liquid sprayed over a field of dandelions. At first, the plants wilted and drooped, but within minutes, new shoots began pushing up through the soil. That was their strongest formula, Lisa said, shaking her head. Enhanced with radioactive particles. It had been 2 weeks since Frank arrived. Every day brought new reports of dandelion advances. 3 more cities had been evacuated as root systems disrupted power and water supplies. We need to understand why they're adapting so quickly, Frank said as they drove back to the research center. No Earth plant could evolve this fast naturally. At the lab, they found Karen Foster, an Earth xenobiologist who had arrived with the second wave of scientists. She was examining soil samples with intense focus. I think I found something, she said without looking up. The Xeraxium in the soil doesn't just speed up growth. It's somehow accelerating genetic mutation. She showed them slides of dandelion cells dividing under the influence of Xeraxium particles. The changes were visible even to the naked eye. It's like the mineral is rewriting their DNA in real time, Karen explained. Every generation is more advanced than the last, and they're reproducing every few days now instead of seasons. That evening, the Xeraxian Defense Council held an emergency session. The mood was grim as military leaders described the losing battle against the plants. We've tried burning, reported General Zaxmore. The underground root systems survive. We've tried toxic chemicals. They adapt within days. We've even tested limited radiation strikes. High Commander Vox Terra's skin patterns showed deep distress. What happened with the radiation? The plants absorbed it, the general answered, then used the energy to spread faster. Frank stood to address the council. There's something about your planet that's changing these plants fundamentally. The Xeraxium in your soil is acting as a mutation accelerator. In simple terms, the dandelions are evolving to become the perfect invasive species for your world. What do you suggest, Dr. Miller? Asked Vox Terra. We need to evacuate more regions and establish clear containment zones, and we need time to study how the plants are evolving so we can predict their next adaptations. The council chamber suddenly shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. What was that? Someone asked. A communications officer entered with a look of panic. The plants have reached the geothermal power station. The root systems have penetrated the cooling systems. We're facing a potential meltdown. The next day, as emergency teams fought to stabilize the power station, Frank and Lisa took readings from the containment zone border. The dandelions now covered nearly 70% of the main continent. Satellite images showed the yellow spread growing hourly. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to their scanner. The root systems are going deeper than we thought. Some have reached over 100 feet down. Frank stared at the readings in disbelief. They're tapping into geothermal energy sources. That's how they're sustaining their growth even without sunlight or regular nutrients. That afternoon, the Xeraxian leadership announced the evacuation of 3 more major cities. Transport ships began taking citizens to colony worlds in the Xeraxian system. This can't be happening, Frank said as he watched thousands of Xeraxians boarding evacuation vessels, all because of one dandelion seed. Later that night, in an emergency meeting with Earth representatives joining via hologram, the Xeraxian military proposed a drastic solution. We have planet-wide sterilization weapons, General Zaxmore stated, designed for worst-case biological contamination scenarios. They would eliminate all plant life on the surface and make the planet uninhabitable for decades, added Vox Terra softly. As the discussion continued, an aide rushed in with new images. The dandelions were showing yet another adaptation. The flowers had begun to pulse rhythmically, releasing clouds of spores that glowed in the dark. The war against a once harmless earth plant was being lost, and time was running out. 3 years had passed since the first dandelion sprouted on Xerax Prime. Frank Miller stood at the viewport of the orbital research station, looking down at a planet that was now more yellow than blue. 68% coverage, reported Keith, checking the latest scans. The northern ice regions are the only areas still largely free of infestation. What had once been the proud capital city of the Xeraxian Empire was now a ghost town. Only research teams and military units remained on the planet's surface. Most of the population, over 9 billion Xeraxians, had evacuated to colony worlds and space stations. The latest atmospheric readings are in, Lisa said, joining them at the viewport. Oxygen levels have increased by 12%. The plants are changing the planet's atmosphere. Frank nodded grimly. They're terraforming Xerax Prime to be more like Earth. The team had established the orbital station 6 months ago, after the ground-based labs became too dangerous. The dandelions had developed a new ability. They could sense large gatherings of organic life and grow toward them at accelerated rates. Dr. Miller called Karen Foster from her monitoring station. You need to see this. On her screen, images from ground-based cameras showed something new. The dandelions were moving, not just growing, actually moving. Root systems were lifting entire plants slightly, allowing them to shift position towards sunlight or water sources. They've developed mobility, Frank whispered. That's impossible. Nothing seems impossible for these plants anymore, Karen replied. The Xeraxium hasn't just accelerated their evolution, it's completely transformed them. That afternoon, the Joint Earth-Xeraxian science team gathered for their daily briefing. Dr. Alan Price, who led the team, presented the latest findings. The dandelions have formed what we're calling a superorganism, he explained. The root systems now connect across entire continents, sharing nutrients and information. They appear to have developed a primitive form of distributed intelligence. High Commander Vox Terra, one of the few Xeraxian leaders who had refused to evacuate, listened with a face showing both wonder and horror. "How deep do the roots extend now?" he asked. "Our latest scans show they've reached depths of over 6 miles. Alan answered. "They're tapping into the planet's core energy. That's how they sustain growth even in darkness and extreme conditions." Frank stepped forward. "We've identified another disturbing development. The plants are processing the Ziraxium in the soil and releasing compounds that are altering Zirax Prime's atmosphere. In simple terms, they're making the air more Earth-like." The room fell silent as this information sank in. "How long?" asked Voxterra. "How long until the atmosphere becomes toxic to us?" "At current rates, about 10 years, Lisa answered. "But given how quickly they adapt, it could be sooner." General Zax Moore, who had been quiet until now, stood up. "The Defense Council has reached a decision. We will deploy the planetary sterilization weapons. It is our only option now." Protests erupted around the room. Frank raised his voice above the others. "Those weapons will destroy all life on the planet. There must be another way." "The decision is made," the general said firmly. "The weapons will be deployed in 7 days. All remaining personnel will evacuate within 5 days." As the meeting ended in chaos, Frank returned to the viewport. The yellow covering seemed to pulse slightly, as if the planet itself was breathing. Later that night, as Frank reviewed the latest data, he noticed something in the plant cell structures that he hadn't seen before. A weakness, perhaps even a solution. "Lisa," he called, excitement in his voice for the first time in months. "I think I found something. Look at how the cells respond to this soil sample." On the screen, dandelion cells exposed to the sample showed signs of stress. Growth slowed. Division stopped. "What is that?" Lisa asked, leaning closer. "Earth soil," Frank replied, "with its natural microbes intact. The dandelions evolved on Earth in balance with these microbes. They evolved together." For the first time in 3 years, Frank felt a small spark of hope. He turned to Lisa, his eyes bright with possibility. "I think I know how to stop them. We call it the Earth fungus solution," Frank explained to the gathered Ziraxian leaders. 5 days remained before the planetary sterilization weapons would be deployed. Lisa stood next to him, holding a container of brownish soil. On Earth, dandelions evolved alongside certain fungi that naturally limit their growth. They'd been dance partners for millions of years, keeping each other in check. The emergency conference room on the space station was packed with Ziraxian officials. High Commander Voxterra leaned forward, his skin patterns showing cautious hope. "You believe this Earth fungus can stop the dandelions?" Frank nodded. "Not stop them completely, but create a balance. The fungi form a network in the soil that connects with plant roots. They can limit how fast the dandelions spread and how much they can change. We've modified the fungi to thrive in Ziraxian conditions," added Karen Foster. "They should spread as quickly as the dandelions themselves." General Zax Moore looked skeptical. "This is another Earth organism. What if it causes more problems?" "The fungi don't attack anything except the dandelions," Lisa explained. "They form a symbiotic relationship, living together in balance. It's how Earth's ecosystems have worked for billions of years." After hours of debate, the Council agreed to test the solution. The sterilization weapons would be delayed by 3 days to see the results. The next morning, special ships spread the modified Earth fungi over a test area of 100 square miles. Frank, Lisa, and Karen watched from a monitoring station near the test zone. For the first day, nothing visible happened. But on the second day, the dandelion's growth rate slowed. By the third day, the yellow flowers weren't spreading at all. "It's working," Lisa whispered as they examined soil samples. "The fungi are connecting with the dandelion roots. They're creating the balance." Within a week, the Earth fungi had been deployed across 60% of Zirax Prime. The dandelion advance stopped. Slowly, in some areas, native Ziraxian plants began to grow again alongside the dandelions. 2 months later, Frank stood on the surface of Zirax Prime for the first time in weeks. He wore a light protective suit, but testing showed the air was still safe for humans to breathe. Yellow dandelions still covered much of the landscape, but they were different now. Smaller, more like their Earth cousins. "The planet will never be the same," said Vox Terra, standing beside him. "But it will live. And eventually, so will we, alongside your Earth plants." Over the next few years, the Ziraxians began to rebuild. But instead of fighting against the dandelions, they designed new cities that incorporated them. Buildings were constructed with special channels for roots to grow without damaging foundations. Energy systems were developed that could use the plant's natural processes. 10 years after the crisis began, Frank Miller returned to Zirax Prime for the opening of New Zirifal, the first of the redesigned Ziraxian cities. Fields of golden dandelions surrounded graceful structures that rose from the landscape like they had grown there naturally. "We learned a valuable lesson," Vox Terra told Frank as they walked through a garden where dandelions and Ziraxian plants grew side by side. "No life form should be dismissed as primitive or harmless. All life deserves respect and study." The experience led to the creation of the Interstellar Biological Exchange Protocols, now followed by all spacefaring civilizations. Earth gained new respect in the galactic community, no longer seen as a backward planet, but as a world whose biology was remarkably resilient and adaptive. As Frank prepared to return to Earth, Vox Terra presented him with a small container holding a dandelion seed and a bit of Ziraxian soil. A reminder, the alien said, that even the smallest things can change worlds. Frank accepted the gift with a smile, knowing that what had begun as a disaster had transformed into something unexpected. A new way for different worlds to learn from each other and grow together. Sometimes, he thought, looking at the golden fields, the most unassuming species proved to be the most remarkable of all.